Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Speech Space Podcast, which is a podcast full of tips and resources for SLPs. I am your host, Jessica Cassidy, and this is episode 114. Today, we're going to be talking about executive function basics for SLPs. We'll mostly focus on covering what executive functioning skills actually are and what we use them for. But we'll also spend some time discussing how they connect to language skills and how SLPs can support executive function skills with our students and our clients. This is a really important topic, and I'm definitely looking forward to discussing it today. But before we do that, I did want to mention that this podcast is brought to you by the Digital SLP membership site, which is a site that features time-saving, interactive digital resources that are all teletherapy platform friendly. You can learn more about that or sign up for a free trial by heading on over to thedigitalslp.com/digitalslp. All right, let's go ahead and get started with today's episode. As SLPs, we all probably have at least a vague understanding of executive function. We can definitely recognize when students struggle with executive function, but we might not feel confident explaining what the different executive function skills actually are and why they are so important. The Harvard Center on the Developing Child describes executive function skills as the air traffic control center of the brain. And I love that analogy because it highlights how crucial these skills really are. They all work together with the ultimate goal of enabling us to successfully self-regulate. So for today's episode, I thought that we could start off by talking about each of the 9 executive function skills. Just as a note, there are multiple executive function models out there, and there's some variation in the terminology that's used. Essentially, we're all talking about the same thing, so I wanted to make sure and address that to avoid any confusion. Okay, so the first skill to talk about is attention. This is foundational. Basically, our attention is what allows us to focus cognitive energy on a certain stimulus. As our attention skills become more mature, we also develop the ability to maintain attention even when distractions are present and to shift our attention back and forth between different stimuli as needed. Next up is working memory. This is also incredibly important and considered to be a foundational executive function skill. With working memory, our brain briefly stores a piece of information and uses it in some way. Working memory is impossible without attention, so right away we can see how these skills work together and build on each other. The next executive function skill is inhibition, which is also known as inhibitory control. This is also considered to be a core executive function skill. Basically, inhibition is what enables us to override our impulses and be selective in terms of where we direct our energy and attention. Next up on our list is fluency. Of course, as SLPs, we are familiar with fluency in terms of producing fluid speech, and we might also work with reading fluency sometimes. But when we're talking about executive function, fluency refers to a person's ability to generate ideas and solve problems in multiple ways. Let's move on to strategic planning, which is another incredibly important executive function skill. Strategic planning is just what it sounds like. It's all about our ability to approach a task or a problem in a purposeful, organized way, rather than using trial and error and hoping for the best. The next executive function skill we're going to talk about is initiation. Now, this one is the ability to be a self-starter, to get going on a task, even if there are some challenges. This one is a huge one for so many of our students. And again, we can see how all of these executive function skills are so connected. If we can't come up with a strategic plan, it's very hard to initiate any actions. Next on the list is shifting or flexibility. Shifting involves our ability to make a change when we notice that something isn't working. It has multiple components and it builds on other executive function skills because first we have to actually notice that what we're doing isn't working, which relates to attention. Then we have to come up with alternate options, which relates to fluency. We also have to choose and implement a new strategy, which relates to strategic planning. All right, just two more to go. And these last two are really connected to each other as well. They are the skills of monitoring and regulating. Now, monitoring is just what it sounds like. It's all about keeping an eye on how things are going and making adjustments as needed. Basically, monitoring involves being your own supervisor and not needing external voices to tell you, hey, that's not going very well. Let's try something different. Regulating is closely related to monitoring, and it also involves every single one of the other executive function skills that I've mentioned. It's kind of like the boss level of executive function. With regulating, we become even more skilled at being our own supervisor and integrate all of the other executive function skills at once in order to continually adjust our actions to be as effective as possible, whether that's at school, at work, at home, or in our relationships. Thank you for sticking with me through all of those. As SLPs, it's so worthwhile for us to have at least a basic understanding of these different components of executive function. So let's next briefly talk about the anatomy and the timing of how these skills develop. If you're thinking that executive function skills are primarily governed by the frontal lobe of the brain, especially the prefrontal cortex, then you're right, although other brain structures are involved as well. As we probably all remember from grad school, the prefrontal cortex continues to develop during the entire first 20 to 25 years of life. So, executive function skills continue to develop throughout that time period as well. This means that even for typically developing students, their executive function skills won't be fully online until they're in the workforce. One other idea to note in terms of development of executive function is that when kids are little, we expect that their executive function skills haven't fully developed yet. So schools typically have lots of supports and structures in place for younger students. These supports become sort of an external executive function system for our little ones. But then, somewhere around third grade, these supports are dramatically reduced, and teachers start to assume that students are coming in with highly developed executive function skills, and that often just is not the case. This is part of the reason why we tend to have an influx of evaluation referrals in those mid elementary school years. It is unlikely that our students will have specific standalone diagnoses related to executive dysfunction, but executive dysfunction can occur as a feature alongside so many different primary diagnoses or risk factors, including things like autism, ADHD, trauma, brain injuries, dyslexia, genetic syndromes, neurological disorders, mental health disorders, language disorders, social communication disorders, learning disabilities, and sensory disorders. You might hear that list and think, wow, pretty much my whole caseload is affected. And you're probably right. So, knowing that many of the students we work with are likely to struggle with executive function, let's talk a little bit about the connection between executive function skills and language skills. The bottom line is that executive function skills support language development and language skills support executive function development, but researchers still don't fully understand the exact nature of how this connection works. One of the most interesting findings from researchers in this area is related to the importance of something they call planful self-talk, which is our ongoing strategic inner monologue as we move through our day. This can be as simple as silent thoughts like, that didn't work. I need a new strategy. But it plays a significant role in our ability to regulate ourselves. So, students with language based disabilities face kind of a double whammy. They probably have some associated executive dysfunction to begin with, and they are not able to use internal language effectively to support executive function skills and self regulation. So, with that in mind, let's talk about some things that SLPs can do to support students who are in this challenging position. It's absolutely possible to address executive function within our language goals. And one way to do this is by externalizing our own self talk for our students as much as possible. Executive function skills are tricky because they are so foundational to academic performance, but they are largely invisible. When we start to speak some of our own inner monologue out loud as a model for our students, we're helping them to make the invisible visible. This takes practice and can feel unnatural at first, but over time, we really can learn to speak our thought processes out loud for students. We can also provide opportunities for them to begin talking through their own thought processes as well by asking questions like, "What do you think will happen next?" We want to emphasize metacognition as much as possible. If we start to get a lot of "I don't know" answers, then we can back up a few steps and provide more modeling and scaffolding. It's also incredibly important to help these students understand that there's a lot that we can learn when things go wrong. Often, students with executive dysfunction feel like they're failing over and over again and don't understand why. We can help them process through these experiences, figure out why they didn't get the result that they had hoped for, and then develop alternate strategies to use for next time. I could keep going on and on here, but I think I'm going to move on for now. If you're interested in additional therapy ideas, Jill from Eastern Illinois University is a clinician and a researcher who specializes in this area. And her work has been a huge help in putting this episode together. And I definitely recommend checking her work out. I will make sure to link to that for you. Okay, there are two more roles for the SLP that I just wanted to quickly mention before we wrap up. The first is advocacy. Students with executive dysfunction are often misunderstood in really painful ways. Teachers and parents might think that these students are just lazy and unmotivated and don't care about school, when often the opposite is true. We can have a really positive impact simply by providing some gentle education about what executive dysfunction is and how it presents in students. We can teach our students how to advocate for themselves too. We can also play a role by supporting students in learning how to use their tools and accommodations. How many times have you been in an IEP meeting where the team decides to give a struggling student a goal related to using a planner? Probably quite a few. But the problem is the team often stops there. We don't think about all of the complicated steps that are involved in actually using a planner. We have to know where the planner is. We have to take it out and open it at the right time. We have to know what kinds of things should be written in the planner. We have to remember to look at the planner. As SLPs, we are experts at breaking down complicated tasks, and there are so many opportunities to work on language skills within something like learning to use a planner. So this is just one more powerful way for us to support the students on our caseloads who have executive dysfunction. So we're going to go ahead and wrap up there for today. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this episode. I hope that you enjoyed it and found some new ideas for how to help your students develop their executive function skills. If you enjoyed today's episode, I would be so grateful if you would take a moment to leave a 5-star review to make it easier for fellow SLPs to find the show. We release new episodes twice a month on the first and third Tuesdays. And also, please don't forget to check out the digitalslp.com/digitalslp if you are interested in exploring the membership and other speech-related content.